Today we're going to work on being able to deal with decimal and percent problems, and also an introduction into equations. In solving equations, a lot of times they want you to get x equals to something, or they want you to be able to get your variable by itself, so we're going to work on part of those today. Okay, now when they ask you to write something in fractional notation, you've actually got to look at what place value your last decimal is in. So if the last decimal place I have is in this first decimal spot, that's a tenth spot. So I take the number that's there and write it over that spot. So it'll be 7/10. Now in the next one, I know it's going to be 21 something when I talk about fractional notation. The reason I know this is because I can see the 21 that's out in front. Then my job becomes to be able to write this using the decimal value that's there. So if I was using this, tenths, hundredths, thousands, so I know that last one is in the thousandth spot. And then I take what's ever written in the decimal places and write it on top. So 74 over 1,000. Now, it says don't simplify. So you actually have to put it in there just like that without simplifying it. Okay, now to write this as a decimal, you know it's going to be 2 point something because you can tell the whole number 2 is in the front. They're going to put a 4 in the 10th spot. So I'm going to put a 4 in this one value spot, which is the tenths. So this is going to be my answer. Okay, the next one says to round to the nearest hundredth. So listen, if you do not know your decimal places, you're going to need to know them. Okay, I always remember that it comes off of the root word. So the root word of 100th is 100, which means if I looked at that, I'd ask myself how many zeros it has. So it has 2 zeros. So that means it has 2 decimal places. So my second decimal place would be right there. So I have to look at the number that comes after it. Rounding is always based on if it's 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, you let it rest. So it really has to do with if this value is 5 or more. So this happens to be 5 or more, which means this number right here is going to go up 1. So 896.54. Okay, now listen, these are simple ones. And I would encourage you, if you know how to do them by hand and can do them quickly, that's fine. If you don't, then make sure you go through and put them in your calculator. Remember, big thing with decimals is your calculator will do this for you, but the decimal points have to line up to be able to add them. So this one ends up being 554. On this one, it's the same kind of thing. Just got to remember the decimals at the end. But if I put this all into my calculator, 17.336. Again, it's about putting them in your calculator. You have to know that 18 has a decimal point at the end. And then when I go to subtract, if I were doing this by hand, I would add zeros here. So if I were to go through and then to put that into my calculator, I'd end up with 17.39. Now this, same kind of thing, except take care of these 2 negatives, make a positive first. So it'll be just like putting this in your calculator, which ends up with negative 1.31. Again, remember when you're doing these in your paper, circle your final answer just to make it easier on me to find it. Okay, again, dividing this out, you do have to remember this is the one that goes underneath. This goes in front, but your job is just put it in your calculator just like that. So it'll be 0.42. Put that there so you can actually see it. On this one, if I put it in my calculator, I'll put this. Now this is where I see some students who get stuck. So if I'm looking at this one, if I want to make a decimal into a percent, I have to move it 2 decimal places that way. So if I moved this 2 decimal places, be 25.9%. If I want to go from a percent to a decimal, I'm going to go 2 that way. So if I move this 2 spots, it's going to go out here. So it'll be 0.338. If you want to put a 0 in front, you can, but you do not have to. Okay, this one has to go 2 this way. So if my decimal is going to be there, I'm going to have to put a 0 in as a placeholder here. This one goes 2 in this direction. One of the things I always remember is this is alphabetical order. So to go from decimals to percent, it's got to move that way. Percents to decimal has to go that way. Kind of helps keep me honest. Okay, now you're going to see a bunch of percent problems. And I usually use this little cheat and make a proportion out of it. So 100 goes in each one. Percent goes above 100, so that's 38. See how this says of 60? So that's going to go in the of spot here. Do you notice how it says what is? That's the one we don't know. So we can make it X or N or whatever we want it to be. That's what we're trying to solve for. So depending on how you learn this, you have 2 choices. You can cross multiply and divide. Cross multiply the 2 you know both of and divide by the third. Or you can do it real algebraically. So cross multiply and solve for X. So if I did this kind of the old-fashioned way, and multiply these 2 first. So 60 times 38 is going to be my first thing, which is going to total 2,280. And then I'm going to divide by the number I didn't use, which was this 100. So X equals 22.8. Okay, now, if I were to put that back in there where X was, and if I did this 22.8 times 100, I should get the same thing as they get the other direction. Law of proportions. So that's a good way to be able to check yourself. Okay, another percent prop, so we're going to go right with this. So on this one, 58 is my percent. Of is what I have, so it has to go in the of spot, so it's 85. And the what is what I don't know, so that can be X or N or whatever you want it to be. So my cross multiplying would start with this. So 85 times 58, which would be 4930. And then I would divide by the third number. So you get 49.3. So 49.3 is going to be what X equals. Okay, now, this is another one of those that's going to be an application. So we're going to use a form of this. Is sometimes referred to as the part, and of is sometimes referred to as the whole. So I know I'm going to be dealing with something like this. My percent in this problem is 32.4, and it says of this many surfers. So that means that's my total. And it wants to know how many of them are women. So that's going to be my N or X or whatever I want to use. So I'm going to start out doing my cross multiplying of those 2. So if I go through and multiply those 2 together, I'm going to have 32.4 times 1,200,000. So I end up with 3,888. 1, 2, 3. And now I'm going to take it and divide it by the number I didn't use, which is my 100. So it ends up being 3888. So that means my n or x or whatever I make it has to be equal to 388,800. Okay, now same kind of thing. Is over of equals percent over 100. They tell me in this one that my percent is 67.7. My of is 338.3. And this is what I'm trying to solve. Now, this one says translate into an equation and solve. So listen, I'm going to do this a little bit more algebraically. So what I'm going to do, use my highlighters, I'm going to take these and I'm going to cross multiply these two. Wherever my letter is, I'm going to start with that first. So n times 100 is just going to be 100n. The other side is going to be 338.3 times 67.7. So 338.3 times 67.7 is going to give me a total of 22,902.91. This is my 100. Divide both sides by 100. First of all, I'm dividing by 100 because 100n, I want to get n by itself. The only way I can do that is to get rid of this 100. So the opposite of multiplying by 100 is dividing by 100. So I end up with 229.0291. Now, I just want to point out in the directions, sorry guys, it says round 4 decimal places is needed. This has 4 decimal places, I don't have to round anymore. Okay, if it were more than that, I would have to round. Okay, now we're going to do the beginning of the solving the equations. First of all, the object of these is to get the variable by itself. So we have to do a lot of opposite operations to get that to happen. So I'm going to start out with this one. I know I want x by itself. So I am going to subtract 29 from both sides. The reason I'm doing that is that helps me get rid of the 29 on this side. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other. So these will cancel. On this side, negative 52 and negative 29 will give me negative 81. Now, if I want you to check your answer, this is the way it works. If I have this as my problem, I'm going to put this 81 right in here and make sure that it works. So if I do negative 81 plus 29, it should equal negative 52 if I've done it right. If I haven't, that's when I need to back up the bus and figure out what I did wrong up here. Okay, to solve the next one, part of our issue on this next one is that, hang on, I'm just going to change my pen here. The variable comes second. So let's switch the two sides of the equal. So I'm going to do y minus 35 on this side and 6 on the other. My job is to go through and to get y by itself. So if I have subtracting 35 here, then I'm going to add 35 to both sides to be able to get rid of it. So when I do that, these two will cancel. So I have y equals 41. Now if I've done this right, when I want to go check it, I'm going to put a 41 in here. And 41 minus 35 better give me 6, or I know I've done something wrong.